What's going on, guys? Braces here. Today we'll talk about simple tricks that can be used in your battles. I think most of them are pretty common and you should know them, but if you don't, I will be glad to teach you something. I think there are a lot of tricks like this, so I will split this into 2 or 3 videos. If you have your own suggestions and you want to share your secrets, please post it in the comments below, the other simple tricks that you can use. So the first one is actually a very old trick that was used in 8th edition as well. So here you basically position 3 units in front of the opponent. He cannot charge past either of them. So if he charges at 2 of them, you just flee, and then he is stuck in place because he cannot charge past the 3rd one, regardless of which unit he decides to pursue. So the picture here is from one of my games, one of my previous videos, when I showcased the shooty dread elves. So as you can see, I just fled with both corsairs and 5 harpies, and because of position of repeater auxiliaries, he cannot charge past at any of my units, and the pendulum has to fail the charge. So the second trick regarding to flee, let's take a quick look at the picture. You have Tomb Harbingers charging the dwarf warriors. The charge is pretty short, so if dwarf warriors decide to flee, they will most likely be caught thanks to the hill, and if they decide to stay, they will most likely be slaughtered. So what is the solution? If you position wolves on the picture like this, if dwarf warriors decide to flee, they will come even on a very low roll, around 4, they will come into 1 inch of boundary rectangle of wolves. So they have to go to the next possible point, which is the point on the picture. Fortunately for them, both wolves and the warriors get outside 18 inches from the Morghasts, which makes them immune to charges now. Additionally, since warriors are not going past the boundary rectangle, but they are only going through 1 inch of the boundary rectangle, they don't force wolves to panic, which is very good because wolves are only leadership 6, so you cannot rely on that. So the next trick comes from one of my games I had here in Switzerland recently. The Thunderhawks are fighting the Caimans. I think we know how this will go. So my opponent was afraid of Vermihawks rolling very highly for the overrun or pursuit and going out of line of sight. So he had to position his units quite far to be able to catch me on basically any roll. And what he didn't realize is he could have forced me to have my overrun or pursuit much shorter. So it uses practically the same technique as in flee, because if he positioned his spearback, for example, right on the position on the right, so after overrun pursuit, if I couldn't have the 1 inch rule respected, then I would have to backtrack to the last position where it was respected. So my overrun would be pretty much limited to 8 inches instead of 12 inches. And it would have made his positioning much easier. So this is actually pretty weird, because as you could have seen in the flee rules, you go to the next possible spot if you break the 1 inch rule. But here in overrun and pursue, if you break the 1 inch rule, you go to the last possible spot. This is a pretty important difference that you should notice. So this one is very important for everyone who wants to use ambushers effectively. So those are very poor dwarfs. They appear on the edge of the board, they move 3 inches up, and they are just 3 inches from the board. This is not very impressive, right? But they have musician, so they can do a very simple trick. Instead of doing what the guys are doing on the left, they can just first conga line, as presented on the second dwarf unit. Then they can reform, as presented on the 3rd unit, and then they can do a 3 inches forward, as presented on the 4th unit. So now compare the leftmost unit with the rightmost unit. This is a little bit more than 3 inches difference, which can be huge in the case of any ambushers. So if you have ambushers with musician, with this simple trick you can really extend your range. So the next trick seems to be working mostly for vampires, but also very good for living armies. But let's start with a very simple example. We have a Kadim Titan facing 20 zombies. In normal circumstances, if Kadim Titan gets the charge, he will not kill all of them most likely, but he will kill the vast majority of them, and there is a very huge chance he will be able to free himself just to get another charge on the next player turn, which is obviously devastating. The vampire player wants to avoid that, so he wants to make sure that the Kadim definitely kills all the zombies in turn 1 of combat. So how can he do that? By simply reforming and showing the rear to the Kadim. So with this trick, if Kadim gets to charge the rear, he gets extra 2 combat resolution for the rear, extra 1 combat resolution for better rear, and zombies have no chance of having ranks whatsoever. So the probability of crumbling the zombies got just much higher. So the same goes for the living armies. Let's see, the Chaos Lord is fighting the Dwarf Warriors. He's pretty unlikely to kill all of them in one turn, and if he just decides to stay like this, he will kill most likely 3 of them. Then they will have a leadership check on a roll of 6. They will most likely flee, and then he won't be able to position himself for a free charge on his next turn. But if he decides to reform to show his rear to Dwarf Warriors, the combat will most likely be near a tie. Maybe he will lose, maybe Dwarf Warriors will lose by 1. So with leadership 8, they will most likely hold. Then he can kill all of them on the Dwarf player turn. And then he can free reform to get a charge in any direction he wants during his own turn. This is actually pretty important, but also pretty tricky, because you have to be careful not to show it too soon, because what could Dwarf Warrior do to offset this? He could obviously show his own rear to the Chaos Lord. So if you want to do things like this, make sure that you are doing your reform secondly. And the last one, again, a very good vampire trick that you have to pay attention to. There are those poor zombies that want to grab the breakthrough objective, but they are just a bit close. They want to help their Master Necromancer, but they don't know how. Fortunately, Master Necromancers are usually pretty smart guys, so they know that if they conga line reform like this, they will still not be within the objective zone. But if they cast a healing spell on zombies, then they will be able to raise another models that will reach the deployment zone and win the scenario for them. So that's all the tricks for today's episode. I think the last thing that is pretty important to remember here is that you don't use those tricks too early in the game, because you never know if your opponent knows them or not. So try to save them for occasions where they really matter, because if they don't really matter, then you are just showing the potential tactic to your opponent that you could have used in the later stages of the game. So for example, the healing for the objective, you could use them as well as conga line redirecting, right? You can just reform zombies facing rear and then extend the redirect with the healing, which is pretty viable. But on the other hand, maybe it's sometimes worth it to save those things for the last turns. It obviously depends on the situation. Okay, hope you guys enjoyed the video. See you in the next one. Cheers.